Last month, the Department of Employment and Labour confirmed that President Cyril Ramaphosa signed into law the Employment Equity Amendment Bill. Employment Equity Amendment Act aims to achieve more rapid transformation in the workplaces of designated employers. The most significant of the amendments relates to the Minister of Employment and Labour's power to set sector-specific employment equity targets to which designated employees will hold to account. Now, the need for this more rapid transformation is, of course, against the background of the slow progress of transformation since the introduction of the Act back in 1998. The bill, which was signed last month by President Cyril Ramaphosa, entails the national and regional employment equity targets soon become mandatory across 18 economic sectors in South Africa. Well, for more on this now, we're very pleased to be joined by Mr. John Botha, who is the Joint CEO of Global Business Solutions. Mr. Botha, thank you so much for joining us this evening. Welcome. Look, John, in layman terms, what exactly does this bill entail?
Well, effectively, it entails the minister setting targets across 18 sectors for designated employers. And Alicia, effectively what it means is that within a 5-year period, these employers need to achieve these targets, failing which they face certain ramifications. And the big impact, of course, is it impacts the entire employment life cycle, as well as the possibility of organizations entering tenders and submitting tenders and qualifying.
And then, John, maybe take us through some of the most significant or notable amendments herein, even though they are still not yet in force.
Yes, so as I said, in the first 4 years, from the 1st of September this year, for the first 4 years, companies can look at their business environments, set targets for African, Indian, colored, and white individuals across all occupational levels, and then implement various measures like career and succession planning, preferential recruitment, training, development to achieve those. And Alicia, I think the other big issue is the amendment to the employees with disabilities definition, which has also been broadened because there's a 2% representation requirement also for employees with disabilities.
And John, I mean, look, the sectoral targets have also not been determined. Do you then foresee this causing some serious upheaval in those sectors once it is published? Because it's not just something that is going to be done overnight. It has to be systematic.
It's a very good question, and I want to just touch on something here. There's this big debate going on between are these quotas or are they targets? And some trade unions are even challenging the legitimacy and the constitutionality of the minister setting these targets, calling them quotas. And Alicia, I think what's really important to you and the listeners is that if companies don't achieve these targets, they have 7 grounds on which to justify the non-achievement, which would include a lack of recruitment opportunities, a lack of promotion opportunities, business interruptions, of course, like COVID-19, potentially even load shedding. So they are targets, and I really believe that organizations that have the right culture will implement the right behavior, and as a result of that, be in a position to achieve these targets when the opportunities arise.
And then, John, what if the employer simply just fails to meet its targets, and how will then government ensure, as we've seen in the past, the issue is always how to enforce new legislation as well as policy. How will then government, do you think, will then find a way to ensure that this policy is enforced across all sectors?
Well, they've got a platform, a technology platform that will be the first port of call. That will measure organizations' progress. And if the progress isn't acceptable, Alicia, what then happens is these companies would have to lead evidence that they've got justifiable reasons. If they fail that, then we're facing potential fines, penalties, litigation. Of course, the big one that is under debate, Alicia, is those companies will be excluded from public sector tenders, and that is the economic impact.
And with the current framework of this whole bill, John, do you think then the employers will then be able to just simply apply these targets? How do you foresee this process unfolding?
Yeah, Alicia, my personal view is that a strategy is a task. A strategy just tells you what you need to achieve. What is more important than a strategy is a culture of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, because culture is what drives behavior. And you referred to the poor progress historically over the last 20 years in meeting these targets and making progress. And I'm very concerned that organizations have approached it as a task, as a compliance issue, failing to address the issues around behavior and issues around the culture of the organizations. And interestingly, the Employment Equity Act actually says employers need to take steps that are based effectively on emotional intelligence, where people have empathy and where people are able not to judge, but people are able to take care of their colleagues. And that includes all races and all genders. But I think the task approach is a challenge, because what it does is it creates distance and resistance, because a lot of leaders and line managers don't set the right tone.
And maybe, John, just in closing, what else are some of your concerns? I mean, we've just noted some that you've mentioned now. With this bill going forward, I mean, maybe some things that we really have not been made privy to as a country, as employees, as well as employers.
I think my concerns, Alicia, relate to external challenges. We know that we're in a very poor state in terms of economic growth. We also know that there are skills deficits. We have the national labour migration policy, where foreign nationals are potentially going to be displaced, certainly from the end of June. We have just come out of COVID. We've got cyber attacks. We've got a very disruptive world around us. And I'm concerned about the polarization and the disruption, because organizations are already under pressure. However, notwithstanding that, I still believe they have an opportunity to give it more impetus than they have over the last 20 years. And then they can explain with justifiable reasons if they're unable to meet their targets, Alicia.
And then in terms of feasibility, John, do you see this, doing wonders for the South Africans, both the employers, for the labor force, basically? Do you think it's going to be feasible? And if so, I mean, when can we look forward to these new reforms being tabled and actually working for us as the labor force?
Well, what's interesting, Alicia, is, the reality is a lot of labor law is now actually looking at the psychological impact of law. So not only the written contract, but the psychological contract, because we all know that mental well-being is a huge issue, and
Absolutely.
Issues of discrimination impact people's human dignity. They impact people's mental well-being. So I think it's got to come into effect as soon as possible, but not only just as a compliance issue. Alicia, the intended date of implementation is the 1st of September this year. We do see that Solidarity have put a challenge. They've implemented a labor court proceeding against the president on the basis that it not only contravenes a United Nations convention, but that it also contravenes our own constitution. My understanding, however, is that that court action is not in itself a legal basis for delaying the implementation. So my personal view is the Employment Equity Commission are proceeding. 1st of September is the intended date, and I think they'll just address and meet the court challenges as they arise.
Mr. Botha, thank you so much for your input this evening. Well, that was Mr. John Botha, the Joint CEO of Global Business Solutions.